Richard's business empire, once the epitome of success, began to crumble. Investments went sour, partnerships dissolved, and debts mounted. The man who once had it all, wealth, status, and admiration, now faced financial ruin. As the news spread, friends and acquaintances distanced themselves. As if failure was contagious indeed, Richard thought it's in dark times you know the true ones. Richard's pride and ego, once inflated by his accomplishments, deflated like a punctured balloon. He became withdrawn and isolated, unable to face the world that had once revered him. He felt like a plague, for that was how he was treated. How could they, he thought? Where did he go wrong? He helped and never made people feel this way. Jane, his loving wife, tried to be his rock, his confidant, and his salvation. She encouraged him to seek help from old-times friends to find a way out of the darkness that had engulfed him. But Richard refused, fearing that vulnerability would be perceived as weakness. He didn't want to be seen lesser than he already was. Their luxurious lifestyle, once a symbol of their success, had switched sides to that of a poor man in just an eye blink. The mansion, the cars, the lavish parties, all seemed like empty indulgences, mocking their current predicament. Richard felt like a fraud, a failure, and a shadow of his former self. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Richard's depression deepened. He struggled to get out of bed, to face the world. He felt like it was over, making it difficult for him to find purpose. Jane's efforts to revive his spirits were met with resistance, and their relationship began to fray. As a woman that she was, she tried tirelessly day and night to revive her sweetheart. It was indeed true that she didn't just marry Richard for his wealth, or else it would have been the end for him. That's if even with her it isn't. The fall from grace had been swift and merciless, leaving Richard and Jane reeling. Their love, once strong and resilient, was now tested by the cruel hand of fate. Would it stay? Richard's fear of rejection and failure intensified, making it harder to get back on his feet. He felt like a shadow of his former self, a mere specter of the successful businessman he once was. The shame and guilt he carried were palpable, a heavy burden that weighed him down. Friends and acquaintances, once eager to bask in his reflected glory, now offered empty promises and condescending advice. You'll bounce back, Richard. You just need to believe in yourself. All these they'd say, while some indirectly mocked him to his hearing. But even the words of the true ones rang hollow, lacking the empathy and understanding Richard so desperately craved. Even some pastors and spiritual leaders, people Richard had once respected and admired, offered little more than platitudes and cliches. God has a plan, Richard, they'd say, or you just need to have faith. But their words felt like salt in Richard's wounds, a reminder that even God seemed to have abandoned him. He, however, in his loss admitted that it was either an all-man-for-himself world or everyone turned their backs on him. He believed that helping him was a thing they could do if they wanted, but they seemed to avoid the whole point and throw empty help to the air. Richard's mask of shame hid his true feelings from the world. He pretended to be strong, to be okay. But inside, he was dying. The rejection and failure consumed him, making it harder to take the necessary steps to rebuild his life. Jane, his loving wife, tried to see beyond the mask, to reach the man she knew and loved. But even she couldn't penetrate the walls Richard had built around himself. He pushed her away, afraid to let her see the depth of his pain and vulnerability, with fear that she would abandon him just like the others. He didn't see what she was hanging around for, he feared. As as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Richard's isolation deepened. He became a prisoner of his own shame, unable to escape the darkness that had engulfed him. His love for Jane, once a source of strength, now felt like a liability, a reminder of his failures and inadequacies. The mask of shame had become Richard's constant companion in place of Jane, a heavy burden he carried everywhere he went. But deep inside, a spark of hope still flickered, a flame that Jane's love and devotion kept alive and that he was scared to lose. The thought made him even deeper within its dark walls. The struggle as real. Jane's endeavors to sustain and maintain her family's stability started to become a daunting challenge. She toiled relentlessly, handling household responsibilities, nurturing the children, striving to keep Richard's hope alive. Yet, in spite of her unrelenting efforts, the pressure was beginning to take its toll. The financial woes were glaring. The lack of money, a persistent source of anxiety. Debts accumulated, creditors harassed, and the once cozy and comfortable lifestyle, now a fading distant memory. Jane's fears and worries about their future and destination kept her eyes refusing sleep. Each night, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Richard's depression deepened, his isolation from community almost total. He abandoned his church attendance, severed ties with acquaintances, and rarely ventured beyond his doorstep. Jane tried to coax him out, to get him to talk, to share his feelings. But he again wasn't ready. To all their children, once shielded from the harsh realities, began to sense the tension. They acted out, seeking attention, and Jane struggled to balance their needs with her own. The stress was palpable, the atmosphere at home thick with anxiety. Despite her own exhaustion, Jane refused to give up. She prayed tirelessly, seeking guidance, strength, and wisdom. She searched for ways to revive Richard's spirits, to restore his confidence, to rekindle the love they once shared. But Richard's struggles were real, his pain and shame overwhelming. He felt like a burden, a failure, a shadow of his former self. The fear of rejection and failure still lingered, making it hard for him to face the world. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Jane's love and devotion remained constant. She stood by Richard, even when he pushed her away, even when the darkness seemed too much to bear. She knew that their love was stronger than any struggle, any challenge, any hardship.
And she held on to that knowledge, like a beacon of hope in the darkest of times.
Richard's struggles and difficulties continued. He realized many of his self-proclaimed friends were fair-weather companions. These friends deserted him in his time of need, unwilling to offer any genuine solidarity and support. One friend stood out in his hypocrisy, Alex, a businessman and once mentor who lacked real substance and empathy. Richard wanted Alex's empty promises, but with Jane's support, he broke free from toxic influence and focused on his own healing and growth. As he did, true friends emerged who genuinely cared about him, standing by him through all. Richard's realization about Alex's fake friendship was a turning point. He didn't need a diviner to tell him his real friends from his fake friends. He began to see that the deceit and falsehood clearly, just as a clear water. He began to see that he had been living in a state of denial all this while, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. He realized that he had been hiding behind a mask of shame and fear, afraid to face the truth about his situation. But this time he has gradually told himself he is going to walk through the storm and emerge victorious. Enough of trying to run away from the reality. Enough of shutting the doors to help. Jane, always devoted, tried to be his lifeline, his anchor in the storm. Of course, this is the time I need to stand firm and fight together with my love. My once shining and golden armor. She always reminds herself. She always listened to him. She cried with him. She prayed with him. But even her love and support couldn't penetrate the darkness that had engulfed him. It's a process, she reassures herself. Richard felt like he was at the bottom of a deep pit, with no way out. He felt like he had lost everything: his business, his friends, his sense of purpose. He felt like he was a failure, a has-been, a nobody. But in that moment of utter darkness, something inside Richard began to stir. He realized that he had a choice, to give up or to keep going. He realized that he couldn't change his circumstances, but he could change his attitude. He could choose to see the darkness as an opportunity for growth, rather than a reason to give up. With newfound determination, Richard began to climb out of the pit. He started small, taking tiny steps towards recovery. He began to see a therapist, to work through his fears and insecurities. He began to reconnect with old friends, to build new relationships based on authenticity and vulnerability. He began to see that he was not alone, that others had gone through similar struggles and had come out on top. Richard began to confront his fears and insecurities by doing menial jobs to earn a penny for the family. Yes, it was too little and condescending based on his former status. But he at least found little joy that he was at least able to provide little again for his beloved family. Every day he earned something for the day. He is reassured that indeed he is not a failure, rather the waves of life struck him unexpectedly. At times on his odd jobs, which was a mirage of whom he used to be. A man of affluence and great status, he meets his former friends and business associates. A sight that always buries a new arrow of pain deep inside his chest, creating a fresh wound and leaving him daydreaming about whom he used to be. Indeed, Richard felt like he was drowning in a sea of despair. He felt like he was losing himself, like he was disappearing into a darkness that seemed to have no end, but he chose to keep trying, if not for anything, for his beautiful and devoted wife who has always shown him an unwavering support. Richard's determination to climb out of the pit was met with small victories. Little drops of victory that would turn into an ocean of victory if he relentlessly continued to put more effort in breaking free from the usual feeling of emptiness. He knew he had to hold on and change the narrative, so he started attending therapy sessions regularly, working through his emotions and gaining clarity on his situation. He began to reconnect with old friends, people who genuinely cared about him and wanted to help. One friend, in particular, stood out: Sarah, a business colleague who had always been supportive and encouraging. She offered Richard a job at her company, a chance to start over and rebuild his career. At first, Richard was hesitant, fearing failure and rejection. But Sarah's belief in him was infectious, and he began to see a glimmer of hope. He accepted the job offer and started working at Sarah's company. The job was challenging, but Richard was determined to succeed. He poured his heart and soul into his work, using his skills and experience to make a real difference. And as he did, he began to feel a sense of purpose and meaning that he had been lacking for so long. He started afresh through the ladder of hope and fulfillment. Little by little, he started gaining more contracts and jobs, and his profile started accelerating just like in the past. Careful not to make the old mistake again, he always put himself in check by self-evaluation of purpose every day after the day's business. Jane noticed the change in Richard and was overjoyed. She saw the spark in his eye, the confidence in his step, and she knew that her husband was back. She supported him every step of the way, encouraging him to keep going, to keep pushing forward. As Richard's career began to flourish, he and Jane's relationship began to heal. They started going on dates again, laughing and talking like they used to. They began to see a future together, a future filled with hope and promise. The glimmer of hope that Richard had seen was now a shining light, illuminating a path out of the darkness. He knew that he still had a long way to go, but he was no longer alone. He had Jane, he had Sarah, and he had himself. And with that, he knew that as Richard's career began to flourish, he and Jane's relationship began to heal. They started going on dates again, laughing and talking like they used to. They began to see a future together. A future filled with hope and promise. The glimmer of hope that Richard had seen was now a shining light, illuminating a path out of the darkness. He knew that he still had a long way to go, but he was no longer alone. He had Jane, he had Sarah, and he had himself. And with that, he knew that anything was possible. Richard's success at Sarah's company was a balm to his soul, speed to his feet, relief to his body, and an antidote to his fears and worries. He felt like he was finally moving on from the past, realizing where he has failed totally, knowing those who was truly his friends, realizing that most of them were all friends with purpose. His spiritual fathers are not really whom they are not bothered if he's about to perish. Finally leaving the shame and guilt behind, believing that the future shines brighter than the brightest. But as he delved deeper into his work, and what did he realize? He realized that he still had unresolved issues to confront. How can I go about confronting my past issues and get them resolved, he asked himself, without making mistakes again? He began to see a therapist regularly, working through the emotions he had bottled up for so long. He talked about his childhood, his relationship with his parents, and the insecurities that had driven him to succeed at all costs. As he confronted his past, Richard realized that he had been living a life that wasn't truly his. A false and a borrowed life. He had been trying to prove himself to others, pleasing those around him and displeasing himself ignorantly, also to show them that he was worthy of love and respect. But in the process, he had lost himself, his values, and his sense of purpose in life. With his therapist's guidance, Richard started to retrace, also to reconnect with his true self. He started to see that he was worthy of love and respect. Not because of his achievements, but because of who he was as a person. He started to embrace his flaws, his weaknesses, and his vulnerabilities. Instead of isolating himself from others, he learned that communication and relating with others really matters a lot. Then, he became a new leaf. Jane noticed the change in Richard and was amazed. She saw the weight lifting off his shoulders, the smile returning to his face, and the sparkle in his eye. She knew that her husband was finally finding peace, finally finding himself. As Richard faced his past, he and Jane's relationship began to flourish. They started to communicate more openly, more honestly, and more vulnerably. They started to see each other in a new light, as imperfect beings who were worthy of love and respect. The past was no longer a burden, a weight that they carried around. Instead, it became a stepping stone. It was a lesson, a reminder of where they had been and how far they had come. And with that, they knew that they could face anything, as long as they had each other. He then believed that truly Jane was really his backbone. Jane had made him pick himself up again. So, is this truly myself? Just in the space of few months, and things had turned around for good for me. Richard's journey of self-discovery and healing had finally led him to a place of redemption and renewal. He had faced his past, confronted his insecurities, denouncing his false life, and feeling so excited that he's no longer the same person begging for arms or looking up to people for assistance. Rather, he has really regained all that he has lost and embraced his true self. He called Jane to apologize to her for all he has done to her and how he refused taking her hands when she stretched them to him to help him stand to his feet again. Also how he tried pushing her away from his life and not listening to her when she was advising him. And immediately, without hesitation, Jane accepted his apologies. Richard and Jane's relationship was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect. They had weathered the storms of life together, and their love had emerged more resilient and more beautiful because of it. Richard's career was also flourishing, as he used his skills and experience to make a positive impact in his community. He had found a sense of purpose and meaning that went beyond his own personal success. As they looked back on their journey, Richard and Jane knew that their love had been the anchor that had held them together. It had been the safe haven where they could be themselves, without fear of judgment or rejection. They knew that their love was not perfect, but it was real, and it was worth fighting for. They had learned to cherish every moment, every kiss, every laugh, and every tear. Jane said to him that truly she missed everything they had then, but with what they've gotten and with what they have presently is far much better than what we had in the past. Richard said to Jane, that would I have done without you by my side. You bring me joy and blessing. How can I be more than a friend to you? Someone close to you. You were not just a wife to me when I thought the whole world was against me, but you proved to me that you were also my missing rib. When I needed a helper, all those I believed could help deserted and flew away, but you stood by me. When all the storms of life were raging, you stood by me. You made me believe and proved to me that at the end of every tunnel there's light. Richard continued by telling Jane that at first he thought he has succeeded, not knowing that it wasn't the right time, and this is the right time of his success, that all what they have right now are all better than the previous ones. Just sit and look at the sky, you'll see how beautiful it is, Richard said to Jane. Truly it's so beautiful, she replied. Just as the sun light up the earth. You are the light of my life. The only one I've ever seen with a smile so bright. That is what you are to me. Together we can be formidable. Richard said all this to Jane while she smiled and was so happy to see him say all this to her, and she said to him that she'll always support him in all ramifications. As they toasted and held each other while she placed her head on his shoulders. Curtain draws. So, is this truly myself? Just in the space of few months and things had turned around for good for me.